You've never heard this story, and that's not an accident. At 5:30 a.m. on July 24, 1876, the morning bell rang across the Bowmont Plantation in Kentucky. 41 men, women, and children were expected to rise for another day in the fields. No one answered. Their cabins stood open, half-eaten meals on tables, letters unsent, clothes still drying on the lines. They were gone, all of them, and no one ever found a body. 3 days later, the investigation was shut down by a judge whose name appears on secret land deeds and coded ledgers, buried in the walls of a house that doesn't exist on official maps anymore. The official story: they ran away. But hidden letters, unearthed nearly 50 years later by a woman who should have kept quiet, tell a different tale. A tale of a brotherhood. A secret society of landowners, magistrates, and businessmen determined to erase anyone who challenged their order. And on that hot Kentucky night, someone did. You were never supposed to hear this, but now you will. And once you do, you won't come back the same. You need to understand something before we go further. Bowmont Plantation wasn't just a patch of tobacco fields. It was a threat. A former slave estate turned model of integration, success, and economic independence, run by a man who believed dignity and wages could rebuild what war had torn apart. Jeremiah Bowmont was a contradiction. A southern elite who paid daily, who let black children and white children learn under the same roof, who gave the landless a stake in the land. To the public, he was a pioneer. But in the dark halls of bourbon-soaked lodges and candle-lit parlors, where the real decisions were made, he was something far worse. A contagion. A symbol of what the South could become if the old ways died completely. And the old ways don't die quietly. There were warnings, letters nailed to his door with its blood-stained nails, hooded riders seen on moonless nights, and a name whispered like a curse: the Kentucky Brotherhood. Not a myth, not a rumor, a machine, a system of silence, of power, of hidden hands moving through courtrooms and churches, erasing any man who dared to rewrite the rules. Jeremiah thought he could outwork them. He was wrong. The Brotherhood wasn't born in a night. It grew out of loss, of rage, of a twisted vision of control. After the Civil War, men who once cracked whips over chained backs now found themselves stripped of status, but they didn't disappear. They reassembled, quietly, with money, with fear, with law. What couldn't be done in daylight was done in basements, in cellars beneath courthouses, in secret meetings held on the third Thursday of every month, just as Jeremiah warned in his final letter. They called themselves patriots, protectors of heritage, but make no mistake, they were an invisible state, the law behind the law. They wore no hoods in those rooms, just fine suits, silk cravats, gold pocket watches, magistrates, clergy, bankers, sheriffs, and they had a single rule: no one threatens the hierarchy. Bowmont's integrated workforce, a direct insult to everything they bled for. His success was proof that their system could be replaced, worse, that it should be, so they set the clock ticking. First, surveillance, then intimidation, then disappearance. 41 workers vanished overnight, not because they were weak, but because they had seen too much and lived too freely, and the machine required silence. The night of July 23rd wasn't quiet, not really. Dogs barked in the distance, then stopped all at once. Lanterns were seen flickering in the woods beyond the eastern fields, then snuffed out like dying stars. And around 2:14 a.m., according to Jeremiah's handwritten log, the plantation bell rang once, without anyone pulling its rope. Every single worker's cabin was left in a different state. Some looked untouched, beds still made. Others were in chaos, chairs overturned, curtains torn down, blood in the dirt that no one ever tested. Not in 1876, not in the decades after. The tools in the fields, still laid out in perfect rows, but 3 acres of the finest tobacco had been deliberately torched, not stolen, not looted, destroyed. A warning, a ritual. And then, the worst part. In the morning, Jeremiah rode to the sheriff, begged for a full investigation. 3 days later, a man named Hartwell walked into the office with documents, stamped, sealed, signed by hands that never left fingerprints. The case was closed. No press, no trials, no names. The records claimed those families just left. But if you've been paying attention, you already know, people don't vanish like that. Not without help, and not without permission. Ask yourself, what kind of power makes 41 people vanish and leaves no outrage behind? Not a natural power, a structural one. This was never about race alone, or economics. This was about control, about testing the limits of silence, about removing witnesses before they could become stories. You see, the Bowmont workers weren't just laborers. They were connectors. Letters to Boston, to Charleston, to Mexico City. Testimonies waiting to be mailed. First-hand accounts of a system trying to evolve past slavery. Proof that it could be done. And that's what had to die. You'll hear whispers about the Brotherhood. Old men muttering in backwoods as bars, names erased from cemetery stones, the same last names appearing in county deeds over and over again. But it goes deeper. Hartwell wasn't just a magistrate. He was the door. Through him, the Brotherhood could shut down any investigation, reassign any judge, replace any sheriff, and if a man like Jeremiah couldn't be bought, he could be broken. The wages stopped, the land dried up, and those who asked questions were told to mind their families if they valued them. By fall, Jeremiah was a shadow, and by spring of 1881, he was dead. Stroke, they said, but the housekeeper remembers something else. He died with mud on his boots, and a burned envelope in his hand. When Margaret Bowmont inherited the estate in 1923, the walls whispered. The manor was rotting. Vines strangled the porches, floors creaked like bones remembering violence, but she wasn't there for comfort. She was there for answers. A schoolteacher by trade, historian by obsession, Margaret didn't believe in family myths. She believed in paper, and Bowmont Plantation was full of it. Behind Jeremiah's study wall, sealed between horsehair plaster and hardwood, she found them. Letters. Dozens. Dates matching the weeks before the disappearance. Every page signed. Sealed. Hidden in fear. The handwriting shook, not from age but from terror. The Brotherhood had names, land records, payment logs, bank codes written in cipher. Margaret deciphered them one by one, and what she saw was organized terror disguised as tradition. Deals made at midnight, acres exchanged for silence, investigations paid to vanish. The missing 41 weren't just casualties, they were leverage. Their disappearance secured property, silenced dissent, and sent a message across Kentucky: integrate, and this is your reward. Margaret took this to county officials. The doors closed. She wrote to newspapers. They never responded. Because the Brotherhood doesn't fear bullets. They fear memory. And that's why you're here now. To remember what you were never meant to know. July 23rd was an execution, masquerading as erasure. But the setup began long before that. In the spring of 1876, Bowmont workers began reporting strange sightings. Men in black coats watching from the tree line, a riderless horse seen wandering the fields at dawn. Children spoke of men whispering in a language no one recognized. Patrick O'Sullivan, the Irish immigrant who wrote to his sister weekly, noted in his final letter, "There is a sickness in the wind here, Mary, the kind that no doctor can treat. If you do not hear from me again, tell Father I tried to be an honest man." His letter was never mailed. It was found decades later, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, folded around a silver rosary, and 3 gold coins. Martha Caldwell's youngest daughter had drawn a picture the day before she vanished. A field, a fire, and a row of faceless men standing in the smoke. These weren't dreams. They were warnings. The Brotherhood didn't act alone. They operated in layers. Landowners above, thugs below, and a shadow clergy who anointed the violence with divine purpose. The message was clear. God does not tolerate equality, and in 1876 they tried to prove it with fire and silence. But truth lingers. Now we descend deeper, into the chamber they never meant you to enter. Because this wasn't just political, it wasn't just racial, it was ritual. The Kentucky Brotherhood had symbols, codes, meeting sites arranged on ley lines, their gatherings aligned with lunar cycles, not by accident, but by design. Beneath the Hartwell house, yes, that Hartwell, was a limestone cellar carved into geometric precision. Margaret found blueprints of it in a sealed county archive, labeled only as Meeting Room Number 3. Inside the ledger, she uncovered beneath Jeremiah's bedroom floor were entries not just of payments, but of offerings. One page, dated 2 days after the disappearances, list, Sortuan sealed, 3 acres scorched, Northern Gate opened. Northern Gate? This wasn't logistics. This was doctrine. A doctrine older than plantations, older than Kentucky, imported from Europe, adapted for southern soil, a belief that land ownership conferred divine right and that blood, spilled in silence, feeds power. The Brotherhood weren't merely racists or capitalists, they were occult engineers of hierarchy. And Bowmont Plantation? It wasn't just a threat to their economy, it was a blasphemy to their order, because it proved that equality worked. And that truth had to burn. If you've made it this far, comment the phrase, "Order is not truth." Comment it twice. One for who you were. Once more, for who you're becoming. After Margaret exposed the Brotherhood's codes, patterns began to emerge, ones too precise to dismiss as coincidence. The disappearances at Bowmont weren't isolated. In 1874, a similar event occurred in Leon County. 17 coal workers, all black and Irish, vanished after reporting illegal labor practices. The mine caught fire days later, officially blamed on faulty lanterns. No bodies recovered. In 1878, a textile mill near Harrodsburg burned to its foundation, 12 integrated families gone, no public investigation, land quietly absorbed by a holding company, owned by Hartwell's cousin. Each event fell within a 60-mile radius. Each targeted multiracial, economically independent communities, each followed by legal obfuscation and profit. You begin to see the pattern, not mass hysteria, not folklore, a controlled demolition of progress. Bowmont was simply the most visible example, the one that had to be buried deepest, because it worked, because it was spreading. And yet, cracks still formed. The Brotherhood feared records, feared memory. That's why letters were burned, reporters were silenced, families threatened into generational silence. But Margaret didn't stop. In her final journal entry she wrote, "If power fears paper, then I will write until I am dust." Dust she became. But her words are still alive, and now they live in you. You're beginning to feel it now, aren't you? That tightening in your gut, that flicker behind your eyes. Not fear, something older. Recognition, because deep down you've seen this before. Not just in Kentucky, not just in 1876. The structure never vanished. It evolved. The Brotherhood became foundations, trusts, political families, law firms. Today, they wear better suits, shake hands on camera, donate to museums. But the engine remains the same. Control the narrative, own the land, silence the anomaly. The disappearance of the Bowmont 41 was never meant to be remembered. That's why history books omit it. Why newspapers from the time were mysteriously damaged, editions lost. why county records list the plantation cabins as unoccupied since 1875, a full year before the disappearances. Time was rewritten, but memory always resists. In 1987, a construction crew digging near the old Bowmont curing barns uncovered something. A circular stone structure buried beneath 5 feet of clay. Inside it, charred remnants, buttons, bone fragments, scorched cloth. No report filed. The site was reburied by order of the Historical Preservation Board, chaired by a Hartwell descendant. You weren't supposed to know that, but you do now. And there's no going back. Power doesn't erase with fire alone, it erases with forgetting. Think. How many times have you driven past a field, a ruin, a broken-down house, never knowing what was buried beneath your tires? That's where they hide it. The Bowmont fields were sold in parcels over the decades. Developers built over sacred ground, gas stations, subdivisions, churches. Yes, churches. Because sanctifying the land cleanses memory. Because if they build a cross over the ashes, you'll never think to dig beneath. But Margaret did. Before her death in 1949, she mapped all known Brotherhood-related ties, 12 of them. 11 now repurposed, renamed, reclaimed. One remains untouched. A patch of forest 3 miles north of the original plantation. Locals call it the place where no sound lives. No birds, no wind, even dogs won't go near it. Why? Because something was sealed there. The Brotherhood's Northern Gate, we still don't know what it meant. A ritual, a prison, an entrance? All we know is what Margaret left behind, a charcoal drawing of a circle surrounded by 41 marks. And the words, they are not gone, they are beneath. So ask yourself, what did they bury at Bowmont? And why has no one dared dig it up? There's something they never told you about soil. It remembers. You can strip a house down to its nails, burn every ledger, silence every witness. But the earth always keeps the original story. And beneath Bowmont Plantation, the story is still breathing. In 2003, a private surveyor, hired to assess the land for oil potential, picked up strange anomalies beneath the fields. Hollow spaces, perfectly circular, geometrically aligned. He filed his report. 3 days later, his license was revoked. His name never appeared on a single oil prospectus again. But his notes survived, and Margaret had drawn them 80 years earlier, almost identical. Same locations, same dimensions. She labeled them chambers. In one of her letters, never mailed, found only in draft, she wrote, "They weren't taken, they were kept, sacrificed not for death, but for containment. Something was stirred in those woods, something they couldn't control. So they fed it. Is this the ravings of a haunted woman, or the final key? Because now, satellite imaging confirms it. Something is under Bowmont, still sealed, still humming, still fed. And if the Brotherhood wasn't just protecting a system, but guarding a threshold, then we've misunderstood this story completely. What if the 41 didn't just vanish? What if they were given? We've assumed this was about race, labor, rebellion, and it was, but not only, because some within the Brotherhood weren't just land barons or judges. They were keepers, gatekeepers, guardians of something older than the Confederacy, older than Kentucky, older than America. In Margaret's recovered ciphered ledger, one phrase repeats again and again, every third page. The land must eat what the blood has awakened. It sounds like madness. But every ancient civilization had its version. Blood for fertility, sacrifice for balance. In Mesoamerica, the crops were believed to fail if the gods weren't fed. In Europe, kings were buried with their slaves to guard the threshold between realms. What was Bowmont? 3,000 acres of limestone-rich soil, high electromagnetic resonance, ley lines converging beneath curing barns. It wasn't just a plantation, it was a seal, a lid. And when the integrated workforce arrived, when equality touched the sacred imbalance, Something shifted, something old stirred. The Brotherhood didn't destroy Bowmont because it failed. They destroyed it because it succeeded, too much, and they needed to feed the gate, 41 souls. To reset the balance. 41 lives weren't chosen at random. Each worker at Bowmont had a pattern, ancestry, belief, bloodline, Irish, African, Appalachian, Creole. Cultures that once practiced rites older than Christianity, older than colonization. Margaret discovered a chart in the final pages of Jeremiah's hidden ledger, a wheel of names, symbols beside each, crescent, eye, crossed spears, broken sun. It wasn't a payroll. It was a map of offerings. The Brotherhood didn't just fear racial integration, they feared ritual convergence. When those 41 lived and worked side by side, something ancient activated through language, rhythm, song, prayer, and not superstition, resonance. Tobacco isn't just a crop. It's sacred in many traditions, burned to carry intentions, planted to honor spirits. At Bowmont, it was harvested under heat, pressure, human vibration, every leaf soaking in memory. So when those fields ignited the night of July 23rd, it wasn't just arson, it was ignition. And what rose through the smoke, what passed through the Northern Gate, wasn't visible to the sheriff or the magistrate. But it was felt. Every member of the Brotherhood present that night died within 13 years, each more violent than the last. Heartbursts, throat cancers, fires. The land had eaten, but it was still hungry. There's a reason this story has been buried beneath a century of silence. Because it's not just about what happened, it's about what could happen again. The Brotherhood never fully died. It splintered. Some bloodlines dissolved into obscurity, others adapted, changing names, founding banks, universities, tech companies. They traded robes for algorithms. Instead of burning crops, they now censor data. But their aim has never shifted. Prevent convergence, keep the bloodlines divided, keep the songs unsung, keep you asleep. Because if 41 ordinary people could unlock a gate just by living freely, singing their ancestral songs, working side by side, imagine what 4 million could do. That's the true fear. Bowmont wasn't just a cover-up, it was a case study, a test, and once they proved how to silence a miracle, they applied it everywhere. Integrated communities mysteriously destabilized, activists disappeared, whistleblowers discredited or self-terminated. This isn't conspiracy, it's design. Margaret's final act before vanishing in 1949 was mailing sealed copies of the ciphered ledgers to 3 universities. None ever confirmed receiving them, but one librarian at Tulane recorded a single line in her personal diary. I read it. I shouldn't have. She died in her sleep that same week. Heart attack, age 31. Now it's your turn. If you're still here, then something in you has already awakened. This was never just a story. It was a transmission. The Bowmont 41 aren't resting peacefully, because they were never laid to rest. Their bones are scattered, burned, buried beneath concrete, locked in vaults of silence. Their names erased, their bloodlines monitored, their memory criminalized. But memory is insurgent. Margaret Bowmont tried to warn us. Her journals were a spellbook, a blueprint, a scream across time. And now you've heard it. You can't unhear it. You felt the echo in your spine, the way your chest tightened in Section 12, the cold behind your ears in Section 8. That wasn't entertainment. That was recognition. You are not just a viewer. You are a vessel. The gate is still sealed, but weakening. Because every time someone speaks their names, remembers the fields, sings the lost songs, the cracks grow wider. They didn't die for nothing. They were the signal. And now, so are you. So speak their names. Remember the 41. And if this video disappears, if this channel is silenced, if you never hear from us again, you know why. They're still watching the gates. And now they know. You're standing at 1,